Dear viewers, the following stories are inspired by real events. However, the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Story Lady of the Lake. In the summer of 2010, at Lake Lanier, Georgia, a hot atmosphere covered the whole area. Lake Lanier, which is famous for its peaceful beauty and recreational activities, has creepy stories about a ghost girl who often appears at night. People call her Lady of the Lake. According to many people, on a summer night many years ago, a car carrying a couple of lovers plunged into the lake from a bridge. The young man was lucky to survive, but the young girl named Susan did not. It is said that, since then, Susan's spirit has been wandering around the lake, especially on moonlit nights. Mark, a 22-year-old college student, and a group of friends decided to camp overnight in a deserted area near Lake Lanier. They heard many stories about Lady of the Lake and were curious to explore for themselves. "It's just some silly story," Mark told his friends, trying to sound incredulous, "but it's fun anyway." As the night fell, the air grew colder. Mark's group lit a large campfire, the flickering flames illuminating their eager faces. They told each other spooky ghost stories, and couldn't help but mention the Lady of the Lake. They say she often appears near the old bridge. Jessica, a girl in the group, said, her voice trembling slightly. Some people even said they saw her walking along the lake shore, looking for the ring she dropped before she died. "Don't scare each other." David, another friend, laughed. "It must be the wind or someone playing a prank." But despite their efforts to be strong, everyone couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Around midnight, when everyone was tired and starting to go to sleep in their tents, Mark was still awake. He sat by the dying fire, looking out at the dark lake. The sound of insects chirping in the night, and the sound of waves gently lapping against the shore sounded a bit lonely. Suddenly, Mark heard a strange noise coming from the lake. The noise sounded like someone was sobbing, very small but clear in the quiet space. Mark was startled, looking up at the sound. The lake was still dark, without any sign of life. "I must have heard wrong," Mark told himself, but the crying sounded again, this time clearer, as if it was very close to him. Mark felt a chill down his spine. He slowly stood up, carefully walking to the edge of the water, trying to see what was down there. The darkness under the lake was pitch black, unable to see anything clearly. The crying continued, sounding more and more miserable. Suddenly, Mark caught a glimpse of a blurry figure standing just below the surface of the water, not far from the shore. The figure looked like a young girl, with long, jet black hair floating in the air. She was wearing a thin, wet white dress. Mark stepped back in panic, almost falling over. He rubbed his eyes and looked back, but the figure was still there, standing silently looking towards the shore. Mark's heart was pounding in his chest. He had never believed in ghosts, but what he was seeing seemed beyond all explanation. He wanted to wake up his friends, but his throat was choked, unable to make any sound. The ghost girl in the lake slowly raised an arm, reaching towards Mark. Her hand was pale and thin, her fingers long and trembling. Mark felt a cold air spread throughout his body. He took a closer look at the girl's face. Her face was pale, without any expression, but her deep black eyes reflected an endless sadness. Suddenly, the ghost girl opened her mouth slightly, and Mark heard a faint whisper coming from the lake. The whisper sounded like a plea, but Mark couldn't make out what she was saying. He tried to move closer, wanting to hear more clearly, but a strong sense of unease stopped him. He felt that there was danger lurking under the water. The ghost girl was still standing there, looking at Mark with sad eyes. Then slowly, she bent down, as if searching for something at the bottom of the lake. Mark stood still for a moment, not knowing what to do. He felt both fear and sympathy for the poor ghost girl. Perhaps she was still entangled in something in this world, unable to transcend. He decided to try talking to her. Are you okay?" Mark asked softly, his voice trembling slightly. The ghost girl did not react, still looking down. Then suddenly, she raised her head, looking straight into Mark's eyes. This time, Mark saw more clearly. Her eyes were red, as if she had just cried a lot. A strange black tear fell from the corner of the ghost girl's eye, melting into the lake water. Mark felt a sharp pain in his heart. He wanted to help her, but he did not know how. The ghost girl whispered something again. This time Mark heard it a little more clearly. She seemed to be repeating the same word over and over again. "Rain. My rain." Then suddenly, the ghost girl disappeared, melting into the black water as if she had never been there. The lake became calm again, only the sound of waves gently lapping against the shore. Mark stood there, stunned, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. The next morning, the sunlight shone across the campsite, dispelling the silence of the night. Mark woke up feeling dazed and tired. He had not been able to sleep after seeing the ghost girl in the lake. The images and whispers of "rain, my rain," haunted his mind. He sat up, looking around the campsite. Jessica and David were still fast asleep in the tent. Only Ashley was awake and was rekindling the campfire. Mark walked slowly over to Ashley, his expression still dazed. "Good morning," Ashley said, noticing Mark's strange expression. "Did you sleep well last night?" Mark shook his head slightly. "Not really." Ashley looked at Mark with concern. "What's wrong? You don't look well." Mark hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell Ashley about what he had seen last night. He described the ghost girl in detail, her crying and whispering. Ashley listened intently, her face gradually becoming serious. Are you sure? Mark, you must have just dreamed it. I know what I saw." Mark insisted. "It wasn't a dream. I saw a girl, a ghost in the lake." At that moment, Jessica and David woke up and came out of the tent. They were surprised to see the serious expressions on Mark and Ashley's faces. "What's wrong?" Jessica asked, her voice sleepy. Ashley told Jessica and David what Mark had just told her. Both of them were skeptical and didn't believe what they had just heard. "Mark, you know, there are a lot of stories about Lady of the Lake," David said. "You're probably obsessed with those stories." "No, I actually saw her," Mark confirmed. "She even whispered to me about a ring." Jessica frowned. "A ring? Are you sure you heard right?" "I'm sure," Mark said. "She kept saying, 'Ring, my ring.'" Ashley looked at Mark with concern. "What should we do? Do you think we should call the police?" Mark shook his head. "I don't think the police will believe us. They'll think we're making it up." "So what are we going to do?" David asked. "Stay here and wait for that ghost to show up again?" Mark thought silently for a moment. He felt a strange urge to help the ghost girl find her ring. Maybe that's why she can't move on. "I think we should try to find that ring," Mark said. "Maybe if we help her, she'll be at peace." Ashley and Jessica looked at each other in disbelief. "Find the ring in the lake? Are you crazy, Mark? This lake is deep," Jessica said. "But we can't just leave her like that," Mark said, his voice filled with determination. "I feel like we have to help her." After some arguing, Jessica and David finally agreed to Mark's plan. They decided to spend the day searching for the ring in the area where Mark had seen the ghost girl. They packed up their things and moved closer to the old bridge, where the car was believed to have crashed into the lake. Mark tried to remember the exact location where he had seen the ghost girl. They found a small boat nearby and rowed out to the middle of the lake. Mark showed them where he had seen the girl. The water was deep and cold. They began to search. David and Ashley used long poles to probe the bottom of the lake, hoping to find the ring. Jessica sat in the boat, watching the water. Mark dove into the water several times, trying to see what was down there. Time passed, but they still found no trace of the ring. The sun was high in the sky. The heat was unbearable, and they were tired and discouraged. "Maybe we should give up," David said, sighing. "Maybe the ring is buried in the mud." Mark didn't want to give up. He still felt a strange connection to the ghost girl. He believed that the ring was still somewhere at the bottom of the lake, and he had to find it. He took a deep breath, then dove into the water again. He swam deep into the lake, trying to look carefully at every corner. Suddenly, he saw something glittering under the mud. He quickly swam closer and picked it up. It was a small silver ring, with a pale blue stone on the face of the ring. Mark felt a jolt of electricity run through his body. He knew that this was the ring the ghost girl was looking for. Mark surfaced, gasping for breath, clutching the silver ring tightly in his hand. He swam quickly towards the boat, where Jessica, David, and Ashley were anxiously waiting. "I found it," Mark shouted, holding up the ring. Jessica, David, and Ashley cheered in unison. They pulled Mark onto the boat, staring at the tiny silver ring on his hand. The pale blue stone sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Oh my gosh, you actually found it," Ashley exclaimed, unable to hide her surprise. "I can't believe it," David said, taking the ring and examining it more closely. "It looks really old." Mark told his friends where he had found the ring. In the mud at the bottom of the lake. He felt an indescribable joy, as if he had just completed an important mission. "So what are we going to do with it?" Jessica asked. "How are we going to give it back to her?" Mark thought for a moment. "I think we should go back to where I saw her last night. Maybe she'll show up again." Although still a little scared, the three friends agreed to Mark's plan. They rowed back to the area near the old bridge where Mark had had his strange encounter with the Lady of the Lake. As the sun began to set, darkness enveloped Lake Lanier once more. The air became cold and still. Mark's group sat silently on the boat, waiting. They stared at the dark water, hoping to see the familiar silhouette of the ghost girl. Time passed, but nothing happened. Their patience began to run out. "Maybe she won't show up again," David said, his voice filled with disappointment. "We found the ring. Maybe she's already at peace." But Mark still didn't give up hope. He felt a strong urge. He knew that the ghost girl was still somewhere around here. He stood up, holding the silver ring in his hand, looking out at the lake. "Susan," Mark called softly, his voice echoing in the quiet night. "I found your ring. Are you there?" There was no answer, only the gentle sound of waves lapping against the side of the boat. Mark felt disappointed. Maybe he was wrong. Just as he was about to sit down, the water in front of them suddenly rippled. A thin white mist slowly spread across the lake, covering their boat. Jessica and Ashley cried out in panic, hugging each other tightly. David also turned pale, staring at the strange mist. What's going on?" Jessica stuttered. Mark didn't answer. He just stared at the mist, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt someone's presence, very close. The mist gradually cleared, And before their eyes appeared the familiar figure of the ghost girl. She stood right on the water, just a few meters away from their boat. Her face was still pale and sad, but her deep black eyes shone with a glimmer of hope. Mark held the silver ring high. "Is this your ring, Susan?" he asked, his voice trembling. The ghost girl stared at the ring, her eyes seemingly shining. She slowly nodded, a black tear falling from the corner of her eye. Mark gently threw the ring towards the ghost girl. The ring fell into the water, creating a small circle. The ghost girl reached out to catch the ring, her hand strangely passing through the water. As the ring rested in the ghost girl's palm, a sad smile flashed across her face. She looked at Mark and his friends, then nodded slightly as if to thank them. Suddenly, a bright white light enveloped the ghost girl. The light grew stronger and stronger, until she completely disappeared in a dazzling halo. When the light dissipated, the lake surface became as smooth as a sheet of paper. The mist also disappeared. Mark's group sat silently on the boat, stunned by what had just happened. She's gone," Ashley whispered, her voice filled with astonishment. "Maybe she's gone," Mark said, feeling a sense of relief and peace in his heart. They had helped Susan find what she had lost, and perhaps her spirit could now rest in peace. Mark's group rowed back to shore silently, carrying with them the strange and creepy story of the Lady of the Lake and the fateful silver ring. They knew that they would never forget this experience, and from then on, they would always remember the spirit of the young girl who had once wandered by Lake Lanier. The next morning, as they packed up to leave the campsite, none of Mark's group spoke much. The atmosphere was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts about what had happened the night before. The initial disbelief had completely disappeared, replaced by amazement and a vague sense of fear. "I still can't believe we actually saw a ghost," Jessica said softly, her voice still trembling slightly. "Me too," Ashley replied. "I never thought those stories were true." David nodded silently, his eyes staring out at the still lake. Mark felt a strange sense of peace. He knew they had done the right thing, putting Susan's spirit to rest. On the way home, in the silent car, Mark looked out the window, watching the green trees along the road. He remembered Susan's sad but finally smiling face. He hoped she had found peace in the afterlife. Suddenly, he saw an old white car parked on the side of the road, near the bridge where Susan had had an accident. The car looked very similar to what he had heard about the car back then. A cold feeling ran down Mark's spine. "Can we stop for a moment?" Mark said to David, who was driving. David looked at Mark in surprise, but still slowly pulled the car to the side of the road. Mark got out of the car and approached the white car. It was old and dusty, seemingly abandoned for a long time. He looked inside through the dirty window. The seats were torn, and the dashboard was littered with broken glass. A feeling of sadness and regret washed over Mark. He could picture the horror that had taken place here so many years ago. He looked down at the ground beside the car and saw something glistening in the weeds. He bent down to pick it up. It was a small silver earring, shaped like a flower. Mark felt a strange connection to the earring. When Mark returned to the car, he told his friends about the old car and the earring he had found. "Do you think this is Susan's?" Jessica asked. Mark nodded. "I think so. Maybe she dropped it that night." Ashley looked at the earring with emotion. "Should we take it to the police? Maybe they can find her relatives." "I'm not sure," Mark said. "Maybe we should keep it. It can be a reminder of what we've been through." All three friends agreed with Mark. He carefully put the earring in his pocket. A few weeks later, Mark and his friends' lives gradually returned to normal. They still went to school, went out, and did the things that young people usually do. But deep in their minds, the memory of that night at Lake Lanier was still very vivid. Mark often thought about Susan and the silver ring. He hoped that she had found true peace. He also began to believe in things that he had previously thought were nonsense. This world probably had many mysteries that science could not explain. One evening, when Mark was sitting alone in his room, he suddenly heard a strange noise coming from outside the window. He timidly looked out, and he caught a glimpse of a woman standing in the dim moonlight. Looking towards his room, Mark's heart beat faster. He realized it was Susan. She stood there, silently watching him, her face still showing the familiar sadness. But this time, Mark didn't feel afraid. He felt a deep sympathy for her. Mark slowly opened the window and looked out. "Susan," he called softly. The ghost girl said nothing, just looked at him with her deep black eyes. Then slowly, she raised her hand, her fingers lightly touching the air, right where the earring Mark was holding in his pocket. Mark understood what she meant. He took the earring out of his pocket and held it up. Susan smiled softly, a gentle and peaceful smile. Then she slowly disappeared into the darkness. Mark stood there for a long time, looking into the darkness where Susan had disappeared. He felt a strange peace. He knew that Susan had found what she was looking for. From that night on, Mark never saw Susan again. But he will never forget the strange experience at Lake Lanier and the spirit of the young girl who haunts it. He keeps the earring as a souvenir, a reminder of a memorable summer night and the existence of things we cannot see with the naked eye. And the story of the Lady of the Lake continues to be told on the shores of Lake Lanier, becoming an indispensable part of the creepy legends of the land of Georgia. Hope this story has brought you entertaining, thrilling and creepy moments. If you like real ghost stories like this, don't forget to click the subscribe button so you don't miss the next videos. Goodbye and see you again.